welcome to Master Fiction Writing with me, Stuart Wakefield. And it feels a bit weird introducing my guest today because we work together. So, Jenny, I'm going to ask you if you would introduce yourself.
We do work together at Author Accelerator, so we talk all the time and are very familiar. So it is strange to interview. I guess technically I'm your boss, huh?
Yes, you're my freelance boss.
I know. But it doesn't really feel like that, but technically that's why it's weird maybe. I don't know. I'm Jennie Nash. I'm the CEO of Author Accelerator, which is a company on a mission to change the emerging book coaching industry and set the high bar for excellence in that industry. I'm also the author of 12 books in 3 genres, including the Blueprint books, which I think we're going to be talking a little bit about today.
We are indeed. We're going to talk about a very specific part of the blueprint as well. So, the reason this conversation has come around is last summer we were running something called the Blueprint for a Summer, which is the brainchild of Jenny and one of her clients, KJ Delantonia. KJ wrote this really, really fun book called The Chicken Sisters, which has now become a Hallmark series, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And obviously, you worked with her on that particular book.
Yeah.
So, Jenny and KJ had this brainchild of actually running the blueprint over the summer. And the idea is that over the space of 10 weeks, authors get together, they get a free copy of the blueprint for a book, whether they're doing fiction, memoir, or nonfiction. Then over 10 weeks, they work with podcasts and Ask Me Anything sessions, and a selection of book coaches work with them. We did write-ins, and from that, they were putting together their blueprint so they can write forward with confidence. And during those 10 weeks, obviously we've got a lot of emails going around between the coaches and Jenny and KJ. And I had put some examples together of something that was akin to a beat sheet, but not a beat sheet. And during that conversation, you said, I hate beat sheets. And I said, I also hate beat sheets. Okay. Now, the purpose of this episode is not to drag anybody, not Blake Snyder, God rest his soul, Jamie Gold, or anyone else who's put together beat sheets, not Joseph Campbell, anybody like that. But I find that there is something very limiting about them. So,
Yeah.
Jenny, what are your thoughts on beat sheets as they are?
I hate them. And I say that with I told you right when we started that I was nervous about this conversation, and
Yeah.
I'm nervous about it because I have that really strong feeling. And I try really hard in my teaching of coaches, which is what I do, right? I teach and train and certify coaches, and you help me to do that. And I try really hard to be what I call tool agnostic. And
Right.
what I mean by that is there is no bad tool, right? All tools are good. Anything that helps a writer do their best work is a good thing in the writing world. And what I want the coaches that I train to do is to help their writers to do what those writers need, whatever it is those writers need. That's the ultimate goal, is to serve the writer and help them do their best work. So if there's a tool that helps them do that, you should use the tool. And a lot of people love the beat sheet based tools, and they depend on them, and they are devoted to them. And obviously there's a lot of people who love them, and so it just feels funny to say there's a tool that I actually really don't like. And so that's why I feel nervous, because I feel like I present myself in the world as love all the people, love all the tools. And here I am saying, oh, but I hate that tool. So I just feel a little nervous about being pinned down about it. But that being said, I will say why I dislike them so much. Most of the work that I have done to develop the tools to teach book coaches came from helping writers. And over many, many, many years, and seeing patterns. That was a really big breakthrough for me, was I kept seeing the same things happening over and over and over again.
Mm.
And one of the things that I kept saw in any genre, all the genres, were these books that were technically correct. Let's just say
Right.
everything was where it was supposed to be. Everything was there. It all seemed buttoned up, and yet they were just lifeless and flat.
Right.
And I would start digging into why this was so. Why is this so lifeless and flat? What is going on here? And it was always, always, always that the writer had taken up some story structure method, a beat sheet method, and followed it. Oh,
Yeah.
here's the dark night of the soul. Here's the third act turn. Here's the thing. And it was like, okay, but this is terrible, right? Like nobody wants to read this. It's not
Yeah.
engaging the reader. There's no room for the reader. There's no heart. There's no soul. It's all great, but somehow it's not great. And I began to see this dependence on the beat sheet was at the root of so much of that. So that's when I say hate it, the reason I have such strong emotion around it is it makes me really upset when a writer has done years of work on something
Yeah.
and it's not holding together. It's so painful, and I wish to save the writers from that, you know?
And what do you think it is about the beat sheet that is limiting?
So I've thought about this a lot. I was thinking about this last night, knowing we were going to talk about it today, and I was trying to think so that I could articulate my position. I actually thought you were going to argue with me. I
I am a bit later when I feel more comfortable.
okay. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can stand up to it. Um, so why do I think that's so? I think it's so because it presents an outside in pathway,
Mm.
meaning look at the external elements that we need to see or that we can see in a finished book. So the
Yeah.
idea of looking at a finished book to understand why it's good is actually, I don't think, a great way to learn how to write.
Right.
It it's the academic model, it's the MFA model. It's the let's analyze these texts and try to understand them from as a reader looking at the finished thing.
Mm.
And then the beats are urging someone at the beginning of the creative process to kind of take that stance as if it's finished. What is it going to look like? What's going to happen at this point, at this point, at the other point? So very plot focused, very external, outside in,
Mm.
almost again taking the position of not what the reader experiences or what they feel, but what they see. Just what do we see on the page? And I think putting the writer in that space at the beginning of the creative process robs them of
Mm.
their agency. It robs them of their imagination. It takes the emotion out of it. To me, it's doing every single thing that you don't want to do with the writer at the
Yeah.
very beginning of the process. And when I hear people doing that, well, I came to a point in my career as a book coach where I would not work with people who insisted on using that language and those tools. I would say,
Really?
I'm not the right coach for you. I can't have a discussion about here's the all is lost moment. Here's the dark night of the soul. Here's the false, whatever. I was like, I can't. So I tried, but I couldn't because it didn't feel to me like it was ever getting to the thing that we needed to get to.
So, as a writer, because you've written fiction early on in your writing career, did you ever use a beat sheet? Did you even attempt?
No.
Okay.
And I have a confession to make, which is something that I have almost never said out loud anywhere.
Okay.
Um, and
Exclusive.
it's just an exclusive secret sneak peek into my writing life. And I think, I don't know why I feel comfortable saying it here, but I'm going to say it. So I had the great privilege. It's a little story. My confession is a little
Okay.
story. I had the great privilege of coaching Lisa Cron on Wired for Story, which is a magnificent book about the brain and how it receives story and how a writer can use that information to write a better book. And I also coached her on the follow-up book, which was Story Genius. And Story Genius came because after Wired for Story, Lisa became extremely beloved in the writing world. People love that book. And they said, can you show us how to do it? Here's the sort of theory and practice and idea. Can you show us how to do it? And that's what Story Genius was. And so I was coaching her on Story Genius, and we were really struggling to pin it to the page. And part of the reason for that is I think Lisa Cron is brilliant. And as many brilliant brains are, it was just hard to get at what she wanted, and it was hard for her. She does not think in a linear way. It was hard. And so we were struggling. And at one point, I can't remember which one of us suggested it. The idea was, wouldn't it be great if we could track somebody actually doing this? Maybe that would help her to pin it down. Maybe it would help the reader of Story Genius to follow along. And I said, I'll do it. I'll write something according to this method, and we'll move through that. And it ended up in the book, my working on a story idea. And I had a story idea. And so it was, I'll take an idea that I have and we'll put it to your method, is sort of what happened. And what's funny is I can barely tell you anything about it at this point, but it was a story about a woman who hates dogs. So here we're talking about all the things that Jennie hates.
Do you hate dogs in real life?
I do. And
I have to resign. I'm sorry.
I know. And part of the reason I thought it would be fun to write a novel is because everyone is always so shocked by that, and they can't believe it. And so the premise of the story was going to be, of course, a woman who hates dogs who somehow has to be with a dog, like is forced into being with a dog. And so there was this whole thing. So I worked out this story while coaching Lisa on Story Genius. It was all very meta.
Okay.
And the confession that I have is not about my hating dogs. I say that all the time. The confession part is the practice of doing that killed that story for me. A lot of people ask me, whatever happened to the story of Ruby and her dog? Did you write it? Did you finish it? Can we read it? Can we buy it? And I'm like, it wrecked it for me. The having to put it into a box wrecked it for me. And so I usually, the answer to the question is, where's that novel? I usually say, well, I started Author Accelerator instead, and I made a company instead of writing that novel. But the real answer is I couldn't work on it. It squeezed the juice out of it for me. And so I can't even remember why I told that story.
No, I was asking you if you had ever, in your writing career, ever tried to use a beat sheet.
Oh, yeah. So that's the closest I came. Now, Lisa Cron would take great exception to my calling Story Genius a beat sheet, because it's not. And she actually really disliked them as well. So she would say, what are you talking about? That's not a beat sheet. But it's an idea of having to certain things have to happen in a certain order. Certain things, like a rules-based approach to the story is what I'm taking a broad view of what beat sheet means, that's the closest I ever came to trying it. And
Yeah.
um and it I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
I mean, and not only could I not do it, it actually made me not want to write the story.
Yes. Now, I will tell you that I have had exactly the same
Mm,
experience. So, and it might have come from just not really understanding to begin with. So, I had found the hero's journey. Somebody somewhere had blogged about it. I was writing a romance. And for somehow in my little brain, someone else had written a blog post about how romances you could map onto the hero's journey. And although there was a little voice in the back of my head saying, well, that doesn't sound right because hero's journey is around Greek myth and heroes. And okay, I guess there are romantic heroes, like I'll try it. And I just could not get my head around it.
mm,
And, I've got an IT degree. So it's, I know how to solve problems.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And I just couldn't do it. And I found myself twisting and twisting and twisting my story
yeah,
into and my characters into knots
yeah.
to try and get them to fit these kind of jigsaw holes.
Right. And so
Then, yeah,
that's what I was referring to, is that the result is often flat because you've solved for that problem,
mm,
right? You've solved for the
yeah,
problem of where does everything go? What belongs in here?
yeah,
Um, is this correct? I'm using air quotes.
yeah,
You've solved for those problems, but that's not what makes a story great.
right,
It's
right,
not what makes a story great. So
yeah.
I think it's solving for the wrong problem.
Mm. And then when I did find a beat sheet that was more kind of, well, it was Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. Clearly, you would save the cat because you don't like dogs, but
I don't like cats either. It's all pets. It's all
if you
pets.
ever come to the UK, you cannot come to my house.
Is it a zoo?
No. But it is two dogs and a cat. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Okay, so then I find, save the cat, and I think, okay, well, this is telling me that all stories are the same, that they all
Yeah.
have the same structure. So I'm going to put my romance into Save the Cat. And I
Mhm.
found examples of romances that fitted Save the Cat, and I did the same thing. I, fitted all the pieces into all the boxes and had a nice spreadsheet, and I knew how many pages each section needed to be. And like you, I got to the end, and all the fun and the joy and the exploration and the sense of play had gone out of the window.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'd made somebody else's jigsaw puzzle and not created my own wacky object.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it. I agree with that. I have rarely seen a finished work that came from that methodology that worked.
Mm,
And I'm not talking about a book out in the wild. I work in the space before publication, right? All
yeah,
book coaches work in the space before publication. And there's so much that happens between a finished book and a published book, um, that can change it, that can improve it, that can make it better. But in my role as a book coach, I've never seen somebody who brought a manuscript forth that followed those things that I felt worked. And
mm,
I do believe that there are subjective measures to writing that works. It's not just, oh, that's my opinion. There are subjective things, and it usually what I see is writer heartbreak.
yeah,
Right? They know something's not working. They can
mm,
feel it, like you explained in your situation there. It just feels flat. It just feels like something's wrong. Or the writer's getting those dreaded letters from agents that say, I couldn't quite connect with this. I didn't
mm,
quite, you know, believe this. I really couldn't get behind it. Those vague things about there's no there there. And when the writer describes the story, it sounds outstanding. Like you read the query and it sounds amazing. And then you get into the pages and it's like, okay, you know?
Yeah. 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 So what have you done about this?
Well, so it's interesting going back to Lisa. I do. I mean, I said that she was brilliant. I think her books are brilliant. I think both
Yeah.
the books are brilliant. Wired for Story, Story of Genius, and her third, Story or Die, which goes in a direction, not for writers, a different direction. But I just think they're outstanding books. But what started to happen was Lisa and I started to teach her method together. We had developed it when she wrote Story Genius. And so we
Mhm.
began to do workshops and presentations. And way, way back in the day at Author Accelerator, we did a Story Genius intensive workshop.
Yeah.
And we had coaches that we had trained in the method giving feedback along the way. It was fantastic. And all the writers were asking for a whole book outline. Is there a place when we can do a whole book outline? And Lisa was adamant that you not do that. She was adamant that you
Right.
build the story up from the beginning and as you go. That looking at the whole thing before you start to write was not, she just was not going to do it. It was not in
Oh,
her methodology.
okay.
And so I said, I'm going to do it. I will make one. It's not part of your method, but I see the writers are needy and I'm going to make one.
Okay.
And so I set out to create something that, so here's my mission. My mission in life is to help writers become writers, not
Right.
necessarily to help them write better books, but how do you become a person who knows how to write a book? How do you become a person who goes from, I have an idea, to I wrote a book that other people want to read? That's my big, big thing. There's a lot of people that guide writers that are helping them raise their voice or learn how to write or learn craft or that. Those are all great things, but for me it's, how do you become a person who can write a book that somebody else wants to read?
Yeah.
And so the way that I was teaching coaches was to help the writer look holistically at what they wanted to write and to step back from the story itself, to step back from the structure or the plot or the idea, and to start by asking, well, why do you even want to write this?
Mm.
Because the writer's intention changes dramatically what the outcome is going to be. And we talk about books like books are all the same thing. You
Mm.
know, they're not. They're so, like, you walk into a bookstore, like, think about this. You walk into a bookstore, you could find in that bookstore something to help you become a better cook. You could find in that bookstore something to help you plan a trip. You could find something to help you apply to college. You could find something to help you get over grief of, you know, a lost love. You could find something to help you escape into another world when your world is falling apart. Like, there's so many things you can find in a bookstore. It's
Yeah.
kind of wild.
Yeah.
And we talk about books like they're all the same. And they're not all the same. And so the writer's intention of how they want that book to live in the world, what they want the reader to feel or experience or encounter, to me, if you don't ask that question, you're going to write something that's not going to land anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's going to be people listening who say, well, but so and so great writer wrote some wandering whatever genius thing that we all love. And it's like, yes, for sure there's exceptions. But for somebody who's wanting to become a writer, who's wanting to write something for other people to read, if they don't know what their intention is, it's just going to be hard to get there. And so that was my starting point always for writers. And then the next question would be, well, what point do you want to make? What do you want them to get from this? What's the takeaway? What is the reader going to find here? Because that's the whole point of writing, is to make that connection with the reader. Without that, and every writer knows this, because that's what we all want when we say,
Yes.
I want an agent, I want a book deal, I want to be famous. What we want is the connection with
Yeah.
the readers. And that's the second point. Um and then you can start to ask questions like, okay, what is the idea? What is the shape? How are we going to manage this? And so this is a long way of saying that the work that I was developing was about helping the writer before helping the book. The writer comes before the story, becomes
Yeah.
before the book. And
Yeah.
so when I began to think about a whole book outline in the context of this work that I was already developing to train book coaches, I wanted an outline that helped the writer. That wasn't so much about the plot, but was about what does the writer need to be able to hold the story in their hands, look at it, turn it all the directions, and like a 360 view, see what they have, see if it holds together before they start to write. And it's something very different from, well, as far as I know, anything else out there. And I always like to say that it works because it actually can work with other methods. You can take I call it the inside outline. You can use the Save the Cat on the inside outline. You can use Hero's Journey on the inside outline. You can map the 3-act structure onto it if you want. If you love those things, you can use this to do that, because it's performing a different function. It's
Mhm.
not a plot machine. It's not a right. Uh, it's a method of inquiry to look at your story and see, is this what I want to write? Is this going to give the reader what I want to give them? Is this holding together?
Mm.
So that's what I made instead.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, my work is the work I enjoy the most is based around the blueprint for a book. Okay. So the that first piece of it, which is doing that story development, getting the writer to really think about, as you said, what am I trying to do, and why am I trying to do it? What's driving me?
Yeah.
And what I love about that is, and I do it too, and I'm in the situation where I've been commissioned to write a play, which is fantastic,
Ooh.
but I'm trying to finish a novella, and shiny object syndrome is kicked in, and I am trying to write the novella, but all I'm thinking about is the play. So I stop writing the novella and I start writing the play, and suddenly I'm not getting the dopamine hit from the novella,
Mm.
and the play is the big shiny exciting thing that I want to be working on. And what I've had to do is take myself back to the blueprint and use it to help me fall in love with the novella again.
Mm.
And that really is revisiting, okay, why did I even want to write this in the first place?
Yeah.
What is it I'm trying to say about the world? What's great about it? What are all the things that I've connected with? And that's before I get to any of the outlining.
Yeah.
So I like to think about that part of the blueprint. I call it the rocket fuel. Okay. And
Yeah.
if I can connect with that, that's going to keep me writing forwards to the end. Okay.
Right. So what I love about that is it's about you, the writer. It's, if somebody is stuck, if they're not finishing, if they're finishing something and it's not getting the traction they want in the
Mm.
marketplace, or readers aren't responding to it, wherever you're stuck as a writer, it's about the writer.
Mm.
It's you're solving a problem on the page for sure,
Yeah.
but it's the person who's solving the problem, right? So we
Mm.
have to be concerned with them. And whenever a writer comes to me and they're in total despair, so I had this happen quite recently, with somebody writing a nonfiction book. um, she called me sobbing, from a hallway, a hotel hallway. She had just given a performance, a speech, a presentation to, I think it was 800 people. And she said, I killed this presentation. It was so good. The work we've been doing on the book just crystallized for me what I'm doing, and it was fantastic. And I was like, this was not happy sobbing. I was like, so what's
Okay.
wrong? um and she said, I just want this book to be as good as this presentation was. I want it to be great, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's there yet. How are we going to get it there? And this was, if I'm doing my math correctly, about 3 weeks until it was due to her publisher. So that was what her emotion was about.
Right.
And there were things in the book that needed to be fixed for sure. We were doing a giant overhaul revision from a draft that was. She came to me with a draft that was what we were describing a novel can be: flat. It was like, this is fine. There's nothing
Mm.
wrong with this book. It's fine. And she said, I don't want to write fine. And so that's what we were doing. We were trying to get there. And so when she called me sobbing, it was, it has to be great. I want it to be great. What are we going to do to get it there to be great? And so as a book coach, it's like, what is she really asking? Is she
Mm.
literally asking, what are we going to do with chapter 3? Are we going to, delete chapter 5? Are we going to revise the end of chapter 12? Is that what she was asking? Not really, right? What
Mm.
what she's asking is, how do I become the person who can do that work, who can see those solutions, who can trust my own self and my own voice and my own way. And that brings us back to the beat sheets. If somebody is devoted to their beat sheet, they're going to automatically be thinking those kinds of almost
Mm.
false solutions. Oh, I need to make the dark night of the soul darker, or I need to throw a wrench into the whatever the thing is. I beat number 10 needs to be stronger. And I don't think that's it. I don't
Mm.
think that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I also, you know, I've said this on this podcast before. I'm sure I've said it to you. I'm always suspicious of somebody who builds their editing or writing career or working with other writers about writing is hard. I always take a step back when I see an ad or something that says, writing a book is hard. It can be hard, and I think it should be more fun than it is hard. Otherwise, why do it?
Yeah.
But in that whole story development blueprinting piece, there is some thinking to be done, some deep thinking to be done, and conversations to be had, and things to be unearthed. But my experience with my clients is it's fun. And
Yeah.
by the time we get to the inside outline, which we will come to next, everybody's whipped up and they are excited about what's going to happen next. And then they
Yeah.
start outlining using the inside outline, and I've written blog posts about this, about, writing tools that don't care about structures, that don't care about beat sheets, and the inside outline makes it onto those posts every single time. So what can you tell us about the inside outline and what its purpose is?
Well, before I answer the questions, you're going to have to help me because I'll probably forget the question. But
Okay.
it's a good question. But I want to respond to what you said about the writing is hard
Okay.
part, because I love that you take exception to that, because I agree. People want to write because it's gonna be deeply meaningful to them. It's going to fulfill something, some deep yearning in them. And when they are able to do that, it's super fun. And the fun is in the intellectual engagement, the creative, applying yourself in this to this very complex undertaking and doing it. That's fun. And I agree with you when you're really cooking with someone. Like I just described a conversation with somebody sobbing and they were deeply upset. But I would venture to say that she will describe this entire process we've gone through as super fun.
Yeah.
She's loved it. And I've loved it because it's almost I don't know, it's all cylinders are firing and you feel so alive and you feel such hope and possibility. It's like, we can do this. We can figure this out. You can make this happen. Like there's nothing more fun than that. So
yeah. And actually it's writing a book changes you. And I don't think, sometimes we have such little control in our lives. And, I used to work in the theatre a lot. And, particularly when you're directing, like you're creating all of this stuff with all of these other people. And there is this singular moment when a group of people have come together and created something, and a congregation of other people come along to witness that thing being done. Okay?
yeah.
And that thing will never be the same thing every time. Okay?
Yeah.
And okay, let's get really real. Okay, so in 2003, I had a breakdown. So my 11-year relationship.
I'm laughing just because I didn't expect that. I thought you were going to say something like, "I don't like dogs either," and you said that. It's like, okay.
No. But so in 2003, my 11-year relationship, the only kind of serious relationship I'd ever had, came to a just the most awful ending. Okay. But to make things worse, we were both in a play together. Okay. So I was directing and he was one of the actors. So we get the gang together. I'm going to lose my thread about why we were talking. Oh, no. Okay.
No, we're going to come back to it.
No. Okay. I do know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. Okay. So, we said to the cast, it's as amicable a split as you're going to get. Okay. And we're going to do everything we can to protect you, the cast, from being affected by this. I think we had a week to go before the show went up. Anyway, the other lead actor decided that he wasn't even going to take the risk, and he just got up and walked away. So we're all looking at each other, and it's like, okay, so now we have two options. The play goes, or we find another actor. So with that, some bright spark turns around and says, well, you know all the lines, because when we forget our lines, you tell us what the lines are without even looking at the script.
This sounds like a play in and of itself.
Oh, honestly, it was awful. But anyway, so I end up taking the other part. Okay. And then we get another director to come on and finish, basically keep the ship sailing.
Wow.
So for 3 weeks, I am now on stage with my ex. And his character is in love with my character, and my character doesn't want anything to do with him. And at the end of the play, it ends up in a fist fight. So I had to do this. Right. Okay. So we go through 3 weeks of this. Okay. And, it's torn us both apart emotionally. By this point I've moved out of the house, and I go straight from that show into acting in a show called Closer, which they made into a movie with Julia Roberts, Natalie Portman, Jude Law, Craig, somebody. And that's all about people breaking up.
What?
Anyway, I at this point I can't get through the rehearsals. I keep breaking down. I'm crying, and the director says to me, you can't be in this play. I'm really sorry, but you cannot function. Anyway, I have this breakdown. I end up in a week in a mental health unit.
Wow.
I'm on suicide watch. Every 15 minutes, somebody came to find me.
Wow.
They wrote down what I was doing. It was just very intense.
Wow.
So by the time I got out in sort of November 2003, I creatively shut down. I took my medication. I had my counseling. I went to work, came home, lived, went back to work. By 2009, I'm like creatively crawling the walls. Okay. And I find out about National Novel Writing Month.
Mm.
And that was 2009, November 2009. And I remember that month being horrifically intensive, but I came out of that with a novel, not necessarily a good novel, but I was changed by the end of that month. And I remember sitting there from having not had, from being felt completely out of control, thinking to myself, I have conjured these people. I have conjured the situations. I have been costume designer. I have been all of the actors and actresses. I have even controlled the weather. And it was such a strong, empowering moment. And it's like in a time where I felt I had no control, I found a way to have complete control. And I see that carry on with people who kind of self-publish, but that I'm never going to get that dopamine hit again, right? And you do get it, and I think you get it as strongly in maybe slightly different ways. And I know, one of my clients has just signed a book deal.
Yeah.
And that rush, that dopamine rush, I was probably more excited for her and her book deal than I have been for mine. So there is something about that creative the thing that changes you. And I think story development and blueprinting kind of sets a writer up for that. It sets them to be excited for that. And it sets up their expectation of being able to finish, which is
Yes.
hugely powerful.
I love your story. That was an incredible story that you told. And the what saved you, that's incredible. And it points to exactly what I mean when I say my work is centering the writer, helping the writer to find their way. There's the number of times writers have come to any book coach and I'm stuck. I can't figure out where this plot goes, or where it falls apart 2/3 of the way through, or they're wrestling with this whole manuscript thing, and they have not asked themselves the most fundamental questions about why they're doing it, what the story is, those things about their relationship to this material and what they want the reader's relationship to the material to be. And that's what the blueprint is designed to get them to do before they start to write. Because what you described, the agency that you have, the power that you have to imagine and control and make something that has the ability to impact another reader, that I think you can't skip over that. You can't. It's really hard to answer those questions or do that wrestling while you're writing. It's a different process. And you can't, it doesn't, for most people, it doesn't naturally happen in the writing process. It's a different process. And it doesn't have to take very long. It can take long, but it doesn't have to take very long. It's just, it's like stop and ask yourself these questions if you're stuck or before you start to write, because it's going to help you be the person who can have the experience you had. It's going to help you be the person who can actually finish the book, because if people are listening to this, I'm holding my hands up as if I'm holding a world or a globe, like you can see the whole,
Yeah.
you can visualize it. It's like, here it is. And here's the shape of it. And I can see it on the shelf, and I'm going to, now I'm going to make it. It's
Yeah.
like, that's what we want, is that belief, that that visualization of the thing, and that's what you experienced, which is so powerful. And it's what I wish for all the writers. So
Yeah. Yeah. And
I,
you know,
I
I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. Okay. And I self-published, and I got lucky, and I sold a lot of copies. It's a terrible book. And if somebody ever says to me, "Oh, I read your book," I'm like, please tell me it was behind the scenes and not the other book that shall not be named. And they're like, "Oh no, I read the other one."
oh
And I'm
no,
like, "Oh, it just makes me feel sick." And I say, "Look, I'll give you a free copy of my latest book just to show you that I
that's
am
so
no
funny.
longer that guy." But when I wrote my first book that came out of blueprinting, I mean, I'm so proud of it. It hangs
Oh,
together so well.
yeah.
And I had creatively, I had more satisfaction, and I felt more creatively fulfilled when that book came out.
Which is what we want, which is, that's one of the great pleasures of writing a book. And
Mm,
I guess the reason that I started out by saying I hate beat sheets is that I said it robs the writer. And I think that's what it robs the writer of, is that sense of agency and satisfaction, and of making a thing that um that that was theirs, um rather than, it's like paint by numbers.
mm.
But you asked me what the inside outline, to describe
Yes,
the inside outline. So I want to make sure
yes.
that I answer that, because I derailed us by talking about the other thing. But so the blueprint is 14 questions. That is this method of inquiry about what you're writing before you start to write. And it culminates in any genre, it culminates in a very short outline. And in fiction, it's called the inside outline. And that name, actually, KJ Dell'Antonia, who you mentioned earlier, actually named it. I was calling it a 2-tier outline, because the function of that outline was to make sure that everything that happens in a story, every plot point, is married to a reason for it happening, an emotional reason for it happening. So looking at what's underneath the action, or underneath the plot, or underneath what the reader sees.
Mm,
So it's very different from a beat sheet, which is looking at what does the reader see happening. Here it's what is the reader experiencing? What are they feeling? What is the story underneath it? And
mm.
this 2-tier idea owes a lot to Vivian Gornick's The Situation and the Story, which
Okay.
is her book, where she talks about, well, exactly that. There's a situation, and then there's the story underneath it. And so the two tiers, there were 2 bullet points, was supposed to force you to think about that, and therefore to think about, what are you trying to say here? What is your point? What do you
Mm,
want the reader to feel? What is the ultimate experience of that going to be for the reader? And when I was working with KJ on the Chicken Sisters, she really quite didn't like the inside outline. She
okay.
was really fighting against it. And she would do the thing. I have rules.
Yeah.
That one of the rules is it needs to be very short on
Yeah.
purpose, because if you let a writer endlessly, I think creativity thrives with constraints. So if you let a writer make an outline however long they want it to be, the natural instinct is to kind of go the beat sheet direction, and put every beat, everything that's going to happen, this unwieldy thing, and you can't see the form, you can't see the shape of it. So the inside outline is is 3 pages in the very beginning. That's all it can be. And KJ would not do it. And she did the exact thing that I have that rule to prevent, and would write these, rambling, endless things. And so we were sort of fighting, I would say, and in a fun way. We were very engaged in the process. And, I kept saying, look, this tool is trying to get you to look at the story from the inside out. It's instead of from the outside in, and here's all the stuff that happens. I want you to feel it, because she had written a draft and come to me with a draft that was flat and ineffectual. And it's like, you could turn this around, but you have to understand what's missing. And I think I said that, inside out thing. And she said, well, that should be the name of this tool that I don't like, and that's where we came up with the inside outline. And it was such a great description of what it was trying to do, and what this little outline is trying to do. And so it's little, it's the major points of a story, the major emotional points of the story, I would say. And the work is making sure that every action has an emotion underneath it, married to it, and that what's driving the narrative is the emotion, not the plot. People who don't understand the tool could look at it and say, just plop in things like you would do the beats. It's like, oh, I can just take the beats and put them in. And yes, you can. But then somebody who's looking at it, I hope, is going to say, but what about what's underneath that? What about, why is that scene there? What is the purpose? What is the reader going to feel? What is the protagonist feeling? That's the reader's usually mapping onto what the protagonist is feeling. And so that's where the tool came from. And at this point, I think I can safely say that many thousands of writers have used it and used it successfully, and certainly doesn't have the fame of Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey or anything like that. But I'm really proud of it because it works, and it works to do the big thing, which is get the writer to see their story, and the story, not the plot. The story, not the plot. And to be in a position to be ready to write it. And I think that does the writer a huge service, that they feel that confidence before they start to write, rather than trying to find the story or find the confidence while they write.
I certified 2.5 years ago, just over 2.5 years ago. And when I was working through the training, which took me a year, as well as working with clients, on the blueprint and the other, work that we do for certification, I was using it for my own, like the next book, the book that came out. And it completely transformed the way I was thinking about the story I was writing, because I had given up beat sheets completely and was just kind of all at sea, really. And I guess I could have picked up an inside outline in isolation and written one. And it's easy to underestimate the inside outline. I've given it to people and said, okay, it's like, 2 bullet points. It's what happens in the scene, and then what's the point. And I normally describe it as, what's the point to the main character? What are they taking from this scene, and what decisions are they going to make, and how does that feed into the way they're going to behave in the next scene? And people are like, yeah. And then, and then, a week later, I'm like, how are you getting on? And it's generally like, I don't really understand it. Will you explain it to me again? I'm like, yes. Explain it again, show some examples. Have you got it? Yeah. And then they go away and it's like, how are you getting on with your inside outline? It's 64 pages. I'm like, okay, well, it needs to be 3. And then there's that, and then there's generally that kind of a period of negotiation.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, will you give me 6 pages?
Yeah.
And I am actually working with a client at the moment, and her inside outline was 20,000 words. I didn't even, I refused to even look at it. And I just said it needs to be 3 pages. And we did negotiate to 6.
Well, it's funny because I said creativity loves constraints. I didn't say that. Somebody famous said that.
Yeah.
I just repeat it. But
Yeah.
and this is true in every form of art. There's, play isn't going to be 10 hours long. Well, I guess one famous play is, right?
Yeah.
The the ring cycle or whatever. But
Yes. Yes.
you think of anything, a painting, a canvas, a song, there's going to be some sort of box that you're working within. Even
Mm.
something like a haiku poem,
Yeah.
has a constraint, or there's certain types of photography where only take like what you see on the street and don't manipulate it. There's constraints. It's like sports. The rules are what give the event meaning, that we're all
Mm.
following this rule, we all understand, we all agree. It's the constraint that is empowering. And so the 3-page constraint is there on purpose, because it makes people uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think, well, it can't possibly fit. There's too much stuff. It's like, that's the point. And we
Yes.
want you to see the skeleton of it. We want you to be able to, and people take objection, of course. People who say, oh, well, that actually wrecks creativity. I like to just sit down and write and see where it goes, and do my morning pages and sort of just see what happens. And there is a time and place for that, for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
But when you're ready to write something again that it's going to impact a reader, you have to be thinking about the reader, and you have to
Yeah.
be thinking about their expectation and desire, and you have to be thinking about what you want them to feel.
Yeah.
um we've all experienced what it's like to be the recipient, the reader of a book like that. It's just, gosh, it's just, there's nothing more powerful
Mm-hmm.
than reading a book that just hits you, just
Yeah.
impacts you. And you sort of think, wow, this person saw me. They don't even know me, and they saw me.
Yeah.
And, as humans, we're just walking around in isolation and despair. And for a book to give you that sense of, oh, I'm not alone here on this
Mm.
planet in feeling what I feel, the complexity and the nuance of what it means to be human. And when someone delivers you that, it's just, right? It's just, oh, your sense of gratitude is overwhelming to the writer for having made that thing.
Yeah.
And that's, as a writer, that's what we're seeking. That's the thing I always come back to, is you don't really want all the things we think we want, the
Mm.
agent and the book deal and the sales and the money and the this and the that. We want to have that connection and close that loop with a reader, because we want to feel the power of the creator in that loop.
Mm.
um Probably because we felt it at the power of the receiver. you
Mm.
know um I recently had this experience, Stuart, where I read a book. It was Dear Edward by Anne Napolitano.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you read it, or do you know her work?
Yes. Yeah.
um I read it way after everybody else. It's a well-known popular book that came out maybe 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and I read it last end of last year. And it just, something about that book. It's about a 12-year-old boy who survives a plane crash, and nobody else survives it. So it's about mortality and grief, and what's the point of living, and all that, which are my favorite kind of books. I love books about, I love all the books about grief and death. I kind of am a connoisseur of them. And um this book just hit me at the right moment, in the right way, at the right time, for all the reasons. And the experience of reading it was really bizarre. By chance, I read the ending on an airplane, and the way the book is structured, the ending
Oh,
is the plane crash. It's coming. It's
yeah.
not a surprise. And it's just really strange how it worked out that way. And I had a moment where I thought, well, I know what I'm going to be reading, and I'm sitting here on this plane. Am I going to go through with it? And I thought, oh, this is actually the perfect place to read the ending of this book, and I read it, and I was just so overcome with uh everything, just gratitude to this writer, a sense of peace about being alive and knowing we're all going to die. I have a very anxious brain, so it's sort of a calmness of my brain for a minute. And the that experience was so moving to me that it felt sacred. And it was
Mm.
night, and everyone on the plane was asleep, and I can't sleep on planes. And I think I was the only one with a light on reading this book about being the only survivor of a plane crash. It was just so moving to me. And to bring it all the way back to the beginning, you don't get that from a beat sheet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You just don't.
Yeah,
Right?
because that book, it has a point and a purpose.
Mm.
And I mean, personally, I've never felt quite so emotionally manipulated by a book as Dear Edward. But
Oh,
like,
interesting.
yeah, but you and that's what, as a coach, I I aim to get my writer to, which is at being at the point where you can write forward with confidence with a book that has a point and a purpose,
Yeah.
and you know what you're trying to do, I guess, and who you want to do it to.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's
and
it.
you and the inside outline gives you that through line, so you don't lose sight of what it is you're trying to do. But what I love about it is it still gives you that room to play.
Yeah.
So if you look at To Kill a Mockingbird, and this is why that, and often this is when I'm working with a blueprint for somebody who's revising, they tend to really struggle because they try and put every scene in because they think every scene is important. And it is, but not necessarily to the through line. So if we look at To Kill a Mockingbird, you've got this scene where Atticus shoots a dog who's attacking the town. And it doesn't actually have anything to do with what would be in the inside outline, I guess, for To Kill a Mockingbird. But what it does do is it illuminates a side of his character, which is he is prepared to do the difficult things to
Mm.
defend a group of people who are defenseless.
Mm.
And so there is that room to play with the inside outline, but you never lose focus of what it is you're doing to actually trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Now,
that.
what I will say is,
Oh, is this where we're going to fight? I've been
yeah,
waiting for it. All
Okay,
right,
now,
cool.
there is a particular beat sheet that do I quite call it a beat sheet? Yeah, no, I am. That I like to use as a lens after somebody has gone through story development, got their blueprint, got their inside outline.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually, to be fair, you could probably think about it as acts. You could maybe hold acts up to it. But look through those structures and say, okay, is this 3, 5, 7 acts? Like, what kind of shape does this story have?
Yeah.
Or particularly if you're looking at category romance or romance in general, I tend to find this works. So I'm going to wave it around. It's Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. It's
Oh,
story
yeah, yeah,
structure for
yeah.
romance novels.
I
Okay.
haven't read it, but I've heard about it.
Right. Okay. Now so the author that I'm working with at the moment is writing historical romance, and what I do say is into this, that I think there are 16 beats in this book. I say it's very romance specific, but I'm saying, okay, let's use these beats as a lens, and let's see if you are missing something, or you need to bring something forward that a romance novelist is expecting.
I love that.
So
I
what
love
we're able
that.
to do is say, okay, do these beats exist? If they don't exist, will this story be stronger for putting that beat in? And then if the beat's there, but it's kind of too subtle to really notice, how can we bring it forward? So those are the times when I would use a beat sheet for a very
Yeah.
specific genre with a very specific set of expectations, because a romance novel is unlike any other novel.
But
Like,
see, you're just demonstrating what a great book coach you are, because
thank
you're
you.
using a tool to help your writers who are writing something very specific, and those kinds of books have very specific requirements that the reader is looking for, and they better be there or they're going to be in trouble. So I think it's a brilliant application of that to your writer. And I would never want to hear a book coach, who says, this is exactly the tool we use and exactly how we're going to use it, and it's all we're going to do, and you can't think about anything else. Like, that's no good. It's, what does this writer need? And so I think that's really awesome. I don't, yeah, it's so funny. It's just so funny. I just can't. I can't. Well, I don't coach. I wouldn't coach romance, category romance, because I know how much you have to know about the tropes and the beats, and I wouldn't feel that I knew enough to help somebody with that.
Yeah. So I do think they have their place. I do think they can work as a great diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
But as I say, diagnostics, it's not something that I would ever start somebody on.
Right. Let's do the beats. That's where we're going to start.
Yeah. It's like, no, let's do the blueprint. Let's develop the story. Let's, your point is love conquers all, hopefully with a spin on that. You know who your ideal reader is. Like, let's go. Let's get this story out on the page. Let's have the fun. Let's get it down. And then later, let's have a look at it through this particular lens and see if it stands up on its own.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. I love it. Yeah.
Okay, good. If you ever want to write a romance, let me know.
I will.
A woman who learns to love dogs.
Right. Well, that was of course what I was playing with, is that's what everybody would expect in that novel, right? They would expect, a sweet ending where she loves the dog, but that wasn't going to be the ending. Oh, that's really funny. Well, we do. I would like to offer your listeners a chance to look at the blueprint, and we'll have a link in the show notes where they can download copies for free if they'd like to check it out. I'd be delighted to share that with your listeners.
Thank you so much, Jennie. I really appreciate that. You don't have to do that. It's available for people to buy. So, for you to make that available to people who are watching or listening, I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, you can check it out. And if you love the beat sheets, see if this can add on and help, or not. We do what we have to do, right?
Okay, we do indeed.
To write the books we have to write.
Yeah, and the books that we want to write that won't leave us alone, and that keep us awake at night and occupy our thoughts when we should be doing something else. Those are the books that we want to be writing, and I think those are the books that readers want to be reading as well, that have really plagued the writer.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. All right, thank you again, Jennie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.